And now we've knit together the three strong elements that are required to make cities work. Through our mayors, we know now that public policy and politics are a part of decision-making. Technology brings innovation and new strategies. And now we hear about the built environment and placemaking and the physical aspects, and it's not just about architects, but it's about engineers and landscape architects and planners. So building community is important. The last segment is about rebuilding community. Some say that we live in an age of natural disasters, and lately Mother Nature hasn't seemed to be very happy with us, and we don't have to go back too far to remember the damage that was done by Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey and New York. And not too much further back, we're reminded about the Mississippi Gulf Coast and other natural disasters that are facing our cities. So we're going to conclude today by talking about how do we build community and how to withstand disasters. How do we rebuild community when disaster strikes? I think we have a panel that has lived it, and we look forward to their comments. First, the Senior Landscape Architecture for the Make It Right Foundation, Tim Duggan. From Kansas City, one of the United States experts in resilient infrastructure, Bob Berkebile, Senior Principal at BNIM. From Edmonton, Canada, Vice President of Urban Planning for the North American Engineering Company, Stantec, that's Simon O'Byrne. The Mayor of Oakland, California, and a Mayor's Institute graduate. Did I mention the Mayor's Institute today? I think I did. Quan. And finally, the moderator, the Chief Planner of the fastest growing city in North America, Toronto, Canada, Jennifer Keesmaat. Welcome, panel. We look forward to your comments.
Well, it's absolutely fabulous to be here today, and I'm going to begin with a little bit of an introduction that's intended to provoke my fellow panelists. And I'm going to do so by suggesting that we need to take the lens out a little bit and think beyond the block, because the block in and of itself is not, in effect, a way to build a city. We must simultaneously start at the block level, but also think very carefully about what's happening at the citywide level. Before I do so, I'll tell you a little bit about the context that I come from, that I bring to this conversation. As was mentioned, the City of Toronto is one of the fastest growing cities in the world. We're a city of 2.7 million people. We cover 630 square kilometers. We have 55,000 immigrants that come into our city every year. We speak a myriad of languages. We're one of the diversest cities in the world. We have 430,000, imagine, commuters coming into the city on a daily basis. And we are the third largest industrial hub in North America. We're the financial center of Canada. We are also the center of research technology in Canada. And we drive a third of the country's gross domestic product. We have 195 high-rise buildings under construction. And to give you a sense of context, New York City has about 80 under construction. So there's a lot of cranes in the air everywhere that you go in the city of Toronto. Now, clearly we're kind of hot. A lot's going on. It's very intense, to say the least. And we have to ask the question, why in fact are we so hot? And one of the reasons I would suggest is the opposite of all those big numbers that I just shared with you. It is because we are a city of neighborhoods. This is in fact our defining characteristic. What happens on the block, the place where people meet and live and share their day-to-day lives, is a fundamental part of the characteristic of our city. It's the social interactions, as Todd just suggested, that in fact make the city a place. This session is intended to focus on downtowns and neighborhoods as a fundamental part of the characteristic of great cities and great city building. And we have some spectacular experts to speak to this context. And one of the questions that I want to throw out to the panelists is a question about the relationship between what's happening at the block level, what's happening in the downtown, and what's happening on the edge of the city, Working as a consultant over the past 15 years in cities across Canada, one of the things that I heard again and again was, why can't we get renewal happening in our downtown core? And frequently the answer was, well, let's look at where the growth is going in your city. Let's look at what you're doing on the edges. Let's look at the kind of systems for movement, how people move about that are in place. Because great blocks are contingent on great pedestrianism. Great pedestrianism is linked to great public transit. And sometimes the block doesn't work or the downtown doesn't work because we don't have some of the larger infrastructure in a city that allows people to live successfully on a block by block basis. So there's a big question here for these panelists, which is about how we promote this shift in the larger city building scale that allows our blocks to be successful. So that's my little prelude or little introduction. The way we're going to handle this panel is we're going to hear briefly from each panelist, about 2 minutes, talking a bit about the context that they bring to this conversation. And then we're going to have a conversation. Hopefully we'll be dynamic. We'll pick on each other a little bit and be provocative. The intention is to have a discourse about the blocks that are essential to the fabric of the city. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Mayor Quan for some introductory comments.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to Kansas City. I'll be coming back on the chair of the Local Government Commission, and we're doing the Smart Growth Conference here next year. So, and also your mayor and I have been ULI Rose Fellows together, and so I know a little bit about your city. I've just come back from China, and I'm a little bit jet lagged, and it's amazing that China now is taking some of its wealth and looking at how to make their cities green. And so what I'm going to tell you is basically what I just told a bunch of mayors in Guangzhou. I think that Oakland has become one of the most exciting cities in the United States. We're ranked #5 by the New York Times between Tokyo and London, mostly because of our Uptown district. And the Uptown district is a little bit like, I would say like a combination of St. Mark's Square, New Orleans during New Orleans Mardi Gras, and the unique sort of California vibe. Oakland is a medium-sized city, and a lot of cities say they're very diverse, but when you have 120 languages and many immigrants in a medium-sized city, we really rub shoulders. We really, and including the refugees from the Midwest who went to San Francisco and they couldn't afford it. You have a really diverse kind of culture, and it has become the place that young hipsters in the Bay Area can both afford to live and want to live. And the heart of it is that it's a green city, and that it's built on 2 or 3 pretty important principles that we decided a decade ago. We decided that we would save some of the beautiful historic core architectural buildings throughout the city, whether it was the Peralta Hacienda, which was the original Hacienda of the Spanish land grants, or whether it's the beautiful Fox Theater downtown, which is sort of the center of revitalizing Uptown, which lied pretty much dead in the 60s when all the retail moved to the suburbs. And also when people were fearful of the Black Panthers and they're fearful of investing in Oakland. And I think that sort of being fearful of investing in Oakland still hurts the city. There's stereotypes about the city in national media. No matter what I do, it's hard to get people to take a look at the real city, which is physically and environmentally one of the most beautiful places in the world, from the redwood forest up in the hills to the beautiful restored marshes in the bay. So knowing our place, treasuring the environment, understanding the historical place, but also making sure that there's diverse housing, because diverse housing is why we have so many immigrants who live in Oakland. The San Francisco Guardian had a front cover that basically said, is Oakland cooler than San Francisco? And the heart of the article was because Oakland's much more affordable. 2-bedroom apartments maybe $1,000 less than San Francisco, and it's only 15 minutes away from BART. It is the place where most of the young artists, where all the hotel and restaurant retail workers in San Francisco live on my side of the bay. So those are the 2 core values, and if you add that with the beautiful bones of being in the center of the Bay Area and public transportation. That's why the Oakland downtown is thriving and was named by the New York Times like the 5th place to visit in the world. And I didn't even talk about the restaurant scene, which some of these people have already checked out.
Go ahead, Bob, you're up.
Well, I'm have the great good fortune to be an architect here in Kansas City. We have 4 offices, but this is my home and this is our central office. And we are architects and urban designers and planners. But about 2 decades ago, we got very focused on community building. And it came by virtue of us being invited to come and help some of the communities along the Mississippi River that had been flooded to relocate. And we started looking at community from the ground up. And since then, we've worked in 12 communities following disasters. And we've learned a lot of things, but 3 important ones that I would like to share are, first of all, for some reason, when something bad like that happens, and this has been New Orleans and Houston and Haiti and all sorts of scales and places, that we are somehow hardwired to rebuild exactly what we had at the earliest possible moment. And we found the real breakthrough is to help them buy the time and space to reconsider what they had when the disaster struck. And every time that's been possible, what we've discovered is they weren't, in fact, so happy with everything they had. And they could take this as an opportunity to build back something totally different. And by engaging in what we've come to call a community dialogue of discovery, which is supported by social media and all the obvious tools and technology, but in fact, having everyone in the community have a direct voice in that process. We can, and we're seeing evidence of this more and more now after 12 communities, we can totally change the outcome of the future and increase the vitality of the social, economic, and environmental systems and the resilience of a community dramatically while reducing operating costs. And so with that evidence, we've come to realize that the third lesson is more important to use these strategies in our existing communities where we are creating unintentionally a man-made human disaster, I would argue, in every community represented in this conference. And so how do we look at our community as a system in order to transform it and create resiliency and create opportunity moving into the future is our primary focus today.
So my name's Tim Duggan. I'm a landscape architect with the Make It Right Foundation. I'm a native of Kansas City, and about 5 years ago, I was asked to leave the prairie and head down to the swamps and work with a group of folks that was started by the actor Brad Pitt to change the paradigm between affordable housing and sustainable housing and work at the level of the block. We had very little luxury. We chose not to work with the local government and not to work with various entities in New Orleans. We wanted to figure out a team and build a neighborhood of LEED Platinum houses, and starting from house 1 to 150, figure out how to do those affordably. We just broke ground on house number 100, all attaining LEED Platinum, and we're now, in the last few years, able to build a LEED Platinum house below market rate. We're allowed to build a LEED Platinum housing unit in other communities. We're partnering with many folks here locally in Kansas City on a transformative project over in Manheim Park and the Bancroft. But what we found from our standpoint is that so many of our communities suffer, don't get the natural disaster aspect, but they're filled with an economic one. And how do you begin to look at layered models of recovery? And that's partnerships that are public, private, and philanthropic. And how can you begin to do that? We've found that it is solely around the big idea and to create a vision and a platform. And that big idea, frankly, is what led from our work in New Orleans to come to Kansas City. The big idea of a surgical intervention around the green impact zone here locally was very intriguing to us. But we took the lessons learned from our block and the innovation of that neighborhood, and every time we built another house, we found a way to replicate that more affordably and then innovate on the next step. And so it's been a very interesting process to see an urban core that's been neglected, that was wiped off of the neighborhood. The only fabric left in the neighborhood was a social fabric. And 4 years later is the most densely populated green community in the country. So you can drive change, And there's, you know, unique aspects of having a fearless leader in Brad Pitt support you across the board. But it's doable, and hopefully we can talk about those in greater detail today.
Thanks, Tim. Simon?
So my name is Simon O'Byrne. This is a really big topic, and we could talk for probably a couple days about, you know, unraveling and unpackaging this topic. It's really huge. There's a couple things I want to talk about. It's really tough in the context of the United States to make a lot of universal comparisons. The trouble is, the two biggest things in most cases holding back downtowns and urban areas across the United States is the perception of crime and the perception of the public school system. And as long as the perception of crime stays high and the perception of the public school system is that it's poor or inferior, then those are some of the biggest impediments towards urban revitalization. Those are two big issues that require intervention from multiple levels. So I'm going to talk about a couple things interrelated with that in terms of some solutions. On the supply side, one of the biggest problems right now is the regulatory environment. I'm all for regulations. The trouble sometimes is that we regulate the wrong things. Land uses are a hangover effect from when we got into public health and started urban planning to make sure we didn't put the foundry right beside where people lived for obvious public health reasons. The legacy today in the modern economy is that we don't need to regulate land uses nearly to the same degree that we once did. What we should be regulating today instead of the land uses is the design, is the public realm. Is the design enhancing the public realm and creating the type of street environment we want to provide? So one of the things I like to think about is from the supply side is moving towards market urbanism, and there's some criticisms of market urbanisms. But market urbanism, one of the ideas I like there is focusing on more, it could be picture zoning, form-based code, but basically changing the whole model on how we're doing planning today so that the permit becomes just as easy as it is to go into an older neighborhood that might be adjacent to a downtown and knock down a single-family house and replace it with a single-family house, that the permitting process would be just as easy to replace that with a 3-story walk-up, with a 2-story cafe and business, and start to get a lot more messy vibrancy. And so I think what we need to do is the governments need to start shifting how we do planning and embrace more market urbanism and to focus on design and less so about land uses, with the end being a little bit more messy vibrancy, realizing that sometimes we're going to have some nuisances that will be created. But the opportunity is that we're going to make it very easy for development to occur. And we're going to create the type of confident environment that business needs to make investments in our mature areas in our downtowns if we go towards the supply side. So make it very easy to get our application. So instead of a process that gets bogged down with the NIMBYs and so forth and drags on for years, that it becomes a matter of months. That's on the supply side. On the demand side, in the New York Times, it was talked about, I'm not sure if it was Friedman's column or whose column it was, but about 2 weeks ago, it was David Brooks's column, 2 weeks ago. He noted two things, two very big statistics that jumped out for me. In 1950 in the United States, 9% of households were singles. Today it's about 1/3, and it's edging towards a European model, which is over 40% of households are singles. The other thing the column noted is that there are far more dogs than children now in the United States. Dogs are the new children. So it seems kind of simple, but it's actually, if we know that people aren't going to be moving into our downtown or urban areas till we fix the school system problem, and sometimes we can with chartered schools and other things, and sometimes we can when there's more money for public schools, but it takes a long time to change your perception of public schools. But if there are far more dogs now than people, then what we need to do is create an environment that plays to the dog owners. And I'm going to want to say a quick digression that's related to this. I think the biggest metric of urbanity are two things: walkability and whether or not that space or that community fosters a high degree of social interaction. Many places might have great urban planning, high quality transit, lots of density, mix of uses, but they fail horribly in terms of urban design in the public realm. They're not places that we love, they're not places we care about, they're not places we're anxious to move to. So I think in order to kind of fix the demand side and foster that high degree of walkability and high social interaction, dogs are the best vehicle. You get two people walking down the street towards one another, no dogs, they don't speak to one another, barely acknowledge one another. One dog, they start to acknowledge each other. Two dogs, and they start chatting, what kind of breed is that, what kind of breed is that. The 12th time they bumped into each other in the neighborhood, they know what's happening with each other's families, they know what's going on. Community fabric starts, that high degree of social interaction starts. So knowing that there's a lot more, not more dogs than children now, and knowing the kind of situation, rather than in terms of our public spaces and urban areas, it's low-hanging fruit to start creating dog parks in terms of dog infrastructure, places for them to run around, and places for little pooper scooping bags and the rest of it. It's just a simple little thing, one thing of many things that needs to occur, but it's a simple thing on the demand side to cater to that huge population of sinks and dinks that have dogs now and not children, and make sure that that environment's safe to them, or pleasing to them. The other thing I love about dog owners is that normally when we create these urban areas and new developments, there's the big crush times before and after the commuters or when they're coming and going. But the trouble is, how do you create vibrancy? How do you get pedestrians on the streets in the quieter times of the day? Well, dog walkers walk the dog at 11 o'clock at night, 6 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, all hours of the day. So the more people that are walking their dogs in the area, the more people there are on the streets. The more people there are on the streets, the more eyes on the streets there are, the safer the space feels. So you increase the dog population in that area, you're going to increase the number of pedestrians, you're going to make it feel like a safer environment than what it was previously. It's a very simple thing that can be done to encourage the demand side for urban revitalization communities.
So I love the emphasis on thinking about people and how we get people to interact. It might be dogs. It used to be kids that got us interacting and sharing public space. One of the themes that I think emerged in each of your comments had to do with very different roles in terms of who facilitates block by block redevelopment. Tim, you talked about not wanting to collaborate and work with the municipal government, obviously seeing them as an impediment to change. I'm sure the mayor would in fact have a very different view on the role that the municipality has to play and can play in facilitating redevelopment. What I'd like to do is just pick up on that theme of roles and how you instigate change and ensure that catalytic change is going to take place. And I'd also like to hear from each of the panelists about a very important question. We don't all have movie stars funding us, which is, where's the cash come from? Because this is usually the biggest impediment to neighborhood change, is figuring out how we can realize some kind of economic value to reinvest in a community. Any thoughts on that? Maybe Bob will kick off with you, given your experience.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think that the world is changing dramatically. And one of the things that's important for all of us, particularly leaders in communities, is to get a real sense of what the patterns of change already are. If we don't do anything, a lot of change is taking place and will continue. And the question is, do we like where this is headed, or do we want to make some strategic moves that would take us in a different place? So to take the project that Tim mentioned, Bancroft School here in Kansas City, which speaks to education and the fact that that school went dark 15 years ago for a reason, it happens to be in what our congressman and we call the Green Impact Zone, but it's what the Kansas City Star refers to as the killing zip code. And so this school, Bancroft, is about what I'm beginning to call urban acupuncture. So that's a
strategic intervention.
It's a strategic investment of leadership, design, and capital, and it takes us layered financing and philanthropy often. It takes strong leadership, but at a critical place at a critical time.
And who are the leaders driving that forward?
So it can be then, if all that happens, catalytic and transformative to that region. It becomes a healthy virus, if you will, that infects that area and spreads from there. And in this case, the leadership included our congressman, fortunately formerly a mayor of Kansas City and a very good one, includes the leadership of the Green Impact Zone. I think Anita's out here somewhere. Neighborhood leadership, Saunders, the president of that neighborhood. And it took, make it right, it took philanthropy, it took a great local developer. And often, more and more, what we're finding is our job, obviously, we're still designers, architects and urban designers, but a big part of it is to get all of the right parties in the conversation in order to be creative about the resources that can be collected in a particular place so that it does become catalytic and it has the kind of impact that will be transformative.
So Mayor Quan, what's your role? What's the role of the municipality in making block by block redevelopment happen?
Well, I started to speak about downtown because that's what's best known in Oakland, but probably we have 58 neighborhoods, and we're particularly known for East and West Oakland where the Black Panthers started, East Oakland with the highest concentrations of poverty, where maybe 28% of the African American or 40% of the African American men don't graduate. California Tomorrow just put out a report that a quarter of all of the minority males between the ages of 16 and 25 don't have jobs and haven't graduated from high school. Very high percentage, and that's not just in Oakland. But I have neighborhoods, 100, what I got in trouble at the meeting for calling about 100 blocks, where 60% of most of the murders in the city take place. So it's, on one hand, you have these downtowns that are growing and have 20,000 people, and part of what I've been trying to do is let it grow naturally and relax the rules. They don't need permits, they have food trucks, they have bands on every block, but really bring people from the entire city so that's not just a young hipster things. And I think I've been pretty successful. You see immigrants out there, I see some rich developers, I see really poor people, I see immigrants from Chinatown. It is finding those places that bring the whole city together that we're all proud of identity. I think the lake in the middle of Oakland is another place. We're just finishing a multi-million-dollar restoration, and we put more places for people to gather. But I think the bigger challenge is out in the poorest neighborhoods, and out in East Oakland, there's a neighborhood that has a LEED Platinum rebuild of a former typical isolated kind of things that we wouldn't build anymore, where all the poor people and we're squeezed into about a 10-block area, and where predictably that was the highest murder and the highest dropout rate. And we put in some great housing, did it, and tried to bring in some of Jimmy Carter's, what's that program, where people have work equity, and at the same time tried to get workforce housing in there so that you didn't have just huge concentrations of poor people. And now I'm literally walking block by block in the area to close down some hotels known for prostitution, and to try to build some public housing, and to get neighborhood retail, putting a lot of pressure on the banks because of the whole foreclosure thing. They don't lend in certain neighborhoods. In certain neighborhoods, you can't even get your clothes dry cleaned, and you have to get on a bus to get to a bank or to get groceries. And we really focused on the food desert. So I actually see the city playing that role of bringing resources and justice to neighborhoods that are underserved, and making the areas that are more beautiful accessible to poor people all over the country. Oakland has something like 130 miles of bicycle lanes. We're now seeing everybody bike, poor African-American kids in West Oakland as well as yuppies. Apparently we're the 9th most commuting by bike city in the country right now. And that's also changed the mix. So it is, how do you find different ways to change the mix? A lot of the answers are going to be green housing, green smart city strategies, because those are what bring people together.
So let's pick up on that theme a minute. You've talked a lot about poor communities and demographics that have different levels of access within a city. And I'm thinking, Simon, about your dog example. And what's interesting to me about the dog example is I imagine, a young professional couple with no kids walking their dogs, meeting, going out to the pub together at night. It's a very gentrified kind of image. And I think we need to think about and ask this question about the relationship between neighborhood renewal and gentrification. It's very easy. We're struggling with this in Toronto. It's very easy to renew neighborhoods and to bring in market housing. It's really difficult to regenerate affordable housing. Let's talk about that question, and that's a good lead-in, I think, for you, Tim. How do you ensure you keep the housing affordable and that neighborhood renewal isn't simply about shifting populations around within a given municipal district?
Well, in New Orleans, we were very clearly told, we do not want you, developer, to come into town to transform our neighborhood. Very clear. We do not also trust the government locally, which is the decision that led us to receiving the first letter of invitation from all 13 stakeholder groups in the lower Ninth Ward. Two of the biggest concerns they had were, one, bring our homeowners back. The lower Ninth Ward had the highest percentage of homeownership in New Orleans, and they were also having the hardest time to rebuild and come home. The second was, you need to proactively create strategies to decrease the aspect of gentrification. And so our homeowner development policy was very clear. We need to create houses for primary residents of this neighborhood, and we need to create mortgage-ready buyers with soft seconds that would be a forgivable loan package that encourages folks to stay in the neighborhood.
So the 100 that you've built, are they people who lived there before, who've come back? Every single one of them?
Every single one of them. Every single one of them has a primary mortgage that is generally in the range of $80,000 to $120,000, and every single one of them have approximately $30,000 to $40,000 of a soft second mortgage that if they choose to move out of the neighborhood and flip their Frank Gehry house, for example, then they're required to pay that soft second. If they choose to revitalize and restore and live in a regenerative neighborhood, then they are going to receive very powerful economic benefits through homeowner equity. And that process, it was innovative at its time and it's highly replicable now. And so how can you build an iterative process from that? How can you ensure that whatever the big idea is, it's not just going to sweep the old ideas down the street into the curb and gutter? And that's a healthy debate that everyone should be having across the country.
An average homeowner in Make It Right, for example, saves at least $200 a month in utilities over their former bill. Yeah, so the last house we did, I think, has a $17 a month energy bill. So that family is saving more than $200 a month, which for a low-income family is a powerful economic tool.
So the green part of this is a really important part of the affordability.
When you have a homeowner that is building trust with an organization and their utility bill is now $200 less, they're receiving a hand up and not a handout. They are in a system that empowers them as a family, and they can put those funds towards a disposable income that they did not have before. And that is how you can rebuild a sustainable community, I think, because they're our biggest fans now. They're standing on their front porch waving their $20 utility bill. And these are 1,300 square foot LEED Platinum homes.
In order to do that, though, you have to also make sure that there are other jobs for those blue-collar people so that they can afford to live in. You have to make the housing reachable. I think many people in San Francisco, who work in San Francisco, I said before, live in Oakland, and some of them go all the way out into the Central Valley, so the commute is the horrors of a state that has AB 32, where we're trying to have stop that sort of spreading commute. And when gases go up, gas prices go up, I think it increases that wanting to live in the central area. But that's one of the reasons why Oakland decided with our Oakland Army Base project, which was stalled for about a decade, is people want us to put a shopping mall there, or Jerry Brown wanted to put a gambling casino there, but the council finally decided that we would expand the Port of Oakland, both because it would create good paying blue collar jobs in the city, and secondly, President Obama overall his strategy is to make sure that we export as much as we import. Oakland was the first port to do that. And so I think choosing how you use your land use, that you have a diverse economy, and then secondly, choosing what kind of housing that you put in these neighborhoods in downtown. So one of the fights that we'd had with one of the former mayors, you can guess which one, was that we put a big unit of affordable housing downtown, and we also made sure that there were 4-bedroom apartments there, because a lot of the Chinese and the other immigrant communities had big families and needed to have multi-generational. So you can push people out many ways. You can push them out economically, but you also could push them out by only building 1- or 2-bedroom apartments downtown. So if you really want to have a diverse, livable, family-centered downtown, then you have to have the kind of housing or co-housing that makes it comfortable to have children or to have multi-generational families. So what kind of housing you put down is just as, and the kind of jobs that you provide in the city are just as important if you want to really have a diverse, just city.
That's really critical. the majority of the world's population lives in multi-generational housing. It's really just an anomaly in Western Europe and parts of North America that don't have as much. But who's driving population growth in all our cities right now are people coming from areas where that's the norm. They desire that. Quality childcare is very expensive, so another thing kind of pushing people to live intergenerationally. And then the cost of housing. But the thing is, people can pool their resources then and then afford more housing than developers and cities normally expect, because multiple people are sometimes on mortgages. In fact, it's not uncommon in some suburban areas to even have 11 people on a mortgage because they're all pooling their money together, and they might have 10 bedrooms and 2 kitchens, and one of them is a spice kitchen. And we need to do the same thing in urban areas. So if those are the people that are driving our population growth, then we need to account for them in urban areas. And too often when we are getting infill development, let's say the high-rise variety you get in Toronto, the big suites, the one with 3 and 4 bedrooms, or the penthouse and the sub-penthouse, well, who can afford that? What you really need is that second and third level, 3 and 4 bedroom, the way you get in New York and elsewhere, you get the big apartments like that.
Well, I think that picks up on a theme that you introduced, Simon, about having amenities in close proximity.
Yeah.
And I think it's important not to understate the importance of mixed-use communities. When we're talking about block-by-block renewal, it's not just about housing, it's about all those other amenities, having schools, having places of worship, and to Mayor Quan's point, ensuring that there's a significant amount of employment in close proximity to where people work. I'm wondering if you can speak to that idea a little bit more about how you integrate the employment with the housing.
Well, I'm a big believer that I'm a big believer in kind of regulating more of the design rather than the land uses as strictly as we've done historically. However, I believe that sometimes we push developers to put commercial before there's a market there. And then we know that there's going to be a market. It just might be 10 years away or 15 or 20 years away when there's a critical mass. So let's just say retail, for example, wants 14 feet, 18 feet kind of bays. So what we can do is encourage them to design it so that it could be residential in the beginning, maybe it's rental, and then it's adaptable. So I think the big thing for me, the big trend is about baking in flexibility and adaptability into our planning so that we know that that building is going to evolve. And I think one of the things we have to, and there's other great tools that we, related to some of these prior conversations, there's inclusionary zoning. People didn't do that a generation ago, so there's inclusionary zoning. There's so many tax tools that are now available to drive all these public policy things we want. There's Donald Shoup's performance-based performance parking, and using performance parking as a revenue-generating tool. There's value capture, which is usually used for transit, but it can be used just as successfully for getting public money to reinvest in the public realm. And of course, there's tax incremental financing that's been used in just about every single jurisdiction, probably Chicago the most, in terms of these tax tools that can be used to get the necessary dollars to get the investment going. And some have been done better than others.
So a question for Tim and Bob, really. Have you looked at exploring how you can move beyond housing into how you create kind of more dynamic environments with a cluster of uses?
Well, it took us a year before we could talk anything beyond what is this house. And from a planner and landscape architect, knowing there's so much more beyond that, we created a program called just that, Community Beyond Housing. And we're dealing with a neighborhood that's situated in a food desert. So how can, whether it's residential applications or right-of-way applications of permaculture-based design, how can we engage the neighborhood to build a food equitable resource locally because the man wasn't providing it, so to speak, in New Orleans? How can you isolate all the various public transit nodes and accentuate them by these node-based developments? How can you look at our vacant lots and build upon them as open space amenities and public realm amenities as you begin to redevelop these core areas? And how can they be centralized around a growth radius or a nucleus for development? That's kind of where I think most of the neighborhoods that we've been involved in are situated. There's so much need. Let's identify what the basic infrastructure needs are and make them regenerative. There's so much need for public realm amenities, whether it be safety issues, lack of lighting, unhealthy sidewalks that all over the place. How can you begin to identify what's basic and what should be provided? And then how can you accentuate the amenities on the big idea, because that's what people want to live around.
But surely as you moved into that, you needed to extend your collaborations to include municipal government and to include other players as fundamental to have around the table. Was that not the case?
It was the case, but it was the case when they started seeing success, and we started seeing people poke around the corner and seeing what's going on down in the Ninth Ward.
Saying, hey, can we be a part of that? It looks so great.
I mean, we've had everything from the Pope of the Greek Orthodox Church to our neighborhood to Obama 4 or 5 times. We're the 3rd biggest tourist attraction in the city of New Orleans. And so how can you stop that from having a bus drive through a neighborhood staring at people and get them to actually stop, engage the neighborhood? And there's a funny story. One of our young men was selling candied goods that his mother made, and was making about $400 a week, selling to the buses that go through the neighborhood. And that's just one spark. We started Operation Slow Mo. We spent $150,000 mowing grass last year. So we started a goat management landscape program in the neighborhood, hired 3 shepherds. They go around the neighborhood. Now we have the levy board wanting to give us a $5 million landscape management contract. So it's all of these different ideas that, as long as it's transparent and engaged with the community will take ownership with these opportunities and really be our biggest stewards.
Well, that kind of brings us right back to the point that you made at the outset, Bob, about, what did you call it, collaborative, a dialogue around how you create a place. So there's a really high sense of ownership.
And I think the dialogue can be informed by the facts, and some of the earlier presentations were all about the numbers. So if we look at the numbers, the big market today is millennials. But if we look at these multi-generational families that are often immigrants, the amenities they each want are exactly the same. Mm-hmm. They want walkability, they want connectivity, they want jobs in the local vicinity, and lots of services. And both of those markets want and need and deserve exactly the same thing. And so when we start looking at our communities as a family and not separate, isolated markets, I think we have a chance of really turning this around and building a lot of vitality.
I think the grain of the cities, because what I've seen in the Bay Area is a lot of my friends who went to Berkeley with me bought cute little houses in Rockridge before it became Rockridge, and they tried to sell their 4-bedroom houses in the suburbs and come back because more things happen in Oakland in a week than happen in their communities in a whole year. And they've got money, they have 4-bedroom houses that they don't need anymore. They're pretty educated. They find themselves coming into Oakland all the time anyhow. So suddenly they want to buy that Rockridge bungalow back, and it's like worth $1 million now. And so they're trying out different neighborhoods, and in one hand, the gentrification, but what I noticed, particularly, I did the toy drive yesterday before I flew here, and that they're also this great source of volunteerism. They're the people who elected Barack Obama. I mean, these are our seniors who are going to be more healthy, have more affluence, are going to have another decade or two of activism. And so for me, I see them as an amazing resource if I can get them into my poor schools to read to kids so that they can read by 3rd graders. The superintendent and the school board has adopted a plan to make schools community centers. I think government agencies can't afford to have all these separate facilities in neighborhoods anymore, and so we put clinics into our health clinics in the poorest neighborhoods. I want to put senior programs there because I don't want to build any more standalone senior centers. I want them to be on campus, and I think what we're trying to do is replicate the village and replicate the community, and we have a real opportunity to do that, both for the digital Facebooks and other things that make people a community. I spend a huge amount of time, you can check out my Facebook, posting pictures of events in different parts of the city, because there are some people who will never go to any of the other 57 neighborhoods. They only live in their neighborhood, particularly the wealthy people above the Oakland Hills will not come down below MacArthur. And so I'm always trying to entice them down. I'm even trying to entice them to First Friday, and last week somebody had said, I went to the First Friday, and you weren't exaggerating. It was magical. He used this word magical. This is a conservative Republican constituent of mine who just didn't believe that this was so amazing and that he felt comfortable and that it was exciting and it was interesting. So we're really building neighborhoods on a lot of different levels, but I think that means that we have to relook at all of our public facilities, and particularly schools. A school that only has a certain age of kids and that people who live in the community and give a lot of money to haven't been in 20 years is not going to be a vibrant institution. And so schools, libraries, senior centers all need to sort of come together in one place. We can't afford the maintenance anyhow, so we might as well build more multi-agency buildings ourselves.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, this notion that the neighborhood can in fact be a magical place, a place of great social interaction and meaning. Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for their insights.